Hello, everybody, good evening, and welcome to Forever Red Devils. It is a Monday night. It is Europa League week, and it is a big reunion on Thursday when we travel to Turkey to welcome, well, let's go and say hi to Jose Mourinho, as we face Fenerbahce on Thursday in a must win in the Europa League, because it's not been a particularly good Europa League campaign, has it? And after such a poor start to the season, need to start clawing our way back into the mix, as we were kind of starting to do this weekend with the Premier League result against Brentford. Coming up in the show tonight, we're going to be talking about Xabi Alonso, we're going to be talking about Lenny Euro and a positive injury update. We'll be talking a little bit about Darren Fletcher as well, potentially getting a ban from the FA. And we're also talking a little bit about some of the transfer news floating around. Talk about United pushing for the next Jude Bellingham. Talks about that and some of the different sort of rumors and conversations around the Manchester United performance. Also, a little bit about Dean Ashton and his criticism of Manchester United and how lazy the punditry is really when it comes to United, and it gets very frustrating. So I'm trying to find the article I wanted to refer to. So just give me a second. In the meantime, though, please do smash like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well if you are new. And let me know what you thought about the performance over the weekend, and whether you think that it is a step in the right direction. Is it just a once-off result, or did we see enough positives to think that we might be able to sort of turn a corner and get back to winning ways, because things have not been where we needed it to be. And hopefully, this is the start. So let's get into it, shall we? And we're going to start with the story. I want to start actually with Dean Ashton, because I think you'll start with the weekend and then look ahead. And it's the reason I'm talking about this is because it's very, very lazy. It's lazy punditry. It's lazy criticism. We've seen this quite a lot. And yeah, I'm so bored of it. When certain teams do well, it's done well, for example, and other teams do it, it's done really poorly. And let's talk about exactly what he had to say. So, after the performance from this weekend, Dean Ashton said about the Manchester United performance the following. He said, they've got players who are superb on the counter-attack. And he said, can Manchester United be that? Can he accept that? They either don't want or can't understand pressing. They can't do it. They're pretty pathetic at it. Teams play through them and they find themselves totally exposed in the middle of the pitch because they don't have the physicality of the midfield players to cope with that. When they do sit slightly deep and allow the opposition to be a bit more on of the ball, Brentford create lots of chances, shots on target, and then they get the 2 goals. They're said to be a counter-attacking team, but he's probably not allowed to be that because of the size of the club. We won't talk about the number of teams who have been counter-attacking teams and won Champions League, Premier Leagues. Liverpool, for example, under Klopp, well, a lot of it was very counter-attacking. Counter-attacking does not mean that you don't have the ability to attack. And also, even the whole pressing thing, the second goal was created from pressing. Like, literally go watch the match again and look at, when we win that ball, when Martinez wins that ball in the midfield, look where the United attack is. We've got like 4 or 5 players inside the Brentford half on players. He therefore has to play a 50-50 ball. Martinez cuts it out, quick ball into Fernandes, flick onto Højlund, bang, you score a goal. Is that counter-attacking football when you're winning the ball back inside their own half with 4 or 5 players inside that half? To sit there and say that is, for example, a counter-attacking goal, is just laziness. It is pure laziness. The second goal, the first goal from Marcus Rashford, he delivers it from 35 yards out with United in possession. So he's managed to go and call us a counter-attacking side in a game where we scored both goals that did not come from counter-attacking football. We'll forget about some of the Real Madrid teams and the way they used to counter-attack, when Gareth Bale, Benzema, and Ronaldo at the front three, how many counter-attack goals did they score? But, that is phenomenal football. As soon as United do it against Brentford, then it's poor and it's not good enough, and etc., etc. So you can get quite over sort of lazy punditry. It's the same as people who sit there and say that there is no style of football for United. Again, lazy punditry. That's not to say that it's the style of football and the plan for United isn't good or is amazing, but to sit there and say there isn't one is pretty. It's the default thing when teams are doing badly. It's, well, what's the plan? It's a bad plan where there is no sort of plan. There is no tactical sort of setup. They got tactically outclassed. It's never a case of we just implemented the game plan badly or the game plan might not be good enough. That's one thing. If you guys sit there saying, listen, this is how he's trying to play, but it's not good enough, that's one thing. But it's such a standard, easy thing for pundits to sit there and say, there's no identity with this team, but there's no plan with this team. There are no tactics. And if you really think Erik ten Hag, who's, won trophies, gone far within the Champions League, has no tactics, you're just being a bit silly, to be brutally honest. And if you're going to be silly like that, well, then I can't help you much, to be perfectly honest. Now, if you look at the Erik ten Hag press, for example, there is a certain amount of merit in terms of not being good enough with regards to how easy it has been recently to play through the midfield, for example. But it is something that he has designed within the sort of the process. And that's why a defensive midfielder is so important, because, Pep Guardiola and Manchester City played quite similarly in terms of that really high press. But they've got a player like Rodri, for example, who's just so phenomenal in their midfield and can get back, can get around the park, and can make up for if teams do get through that midfield or do get through that sort of first line of Manchester City. So you can critique him by all means, and critique away, really. There's lots you can do critique. I mean, for example, I think Ten Hag's in-game management in the last sort of couple of seasons have been really poor. I've really disliked a lot of the changes he makes with regards to taking centre-backs off at half-time, with regards to, rotating centre-backs a lot in general from one game to the next. They're not really allowing these players to sort of form partnerships. There's plenty of room there to critique that sort of vibe. But to sit there and talk about the fact that, we're a counter-attacking side who can't press in a game where the United press created one of the goals and neither goals was attacking football, shows you the level of punditry that we sometimes have to subject ourselves to. And let's hope that, a producer is in the air saying, mate, come on, let's actually watch this game. Let's actually, provide something that's actually like pretty good. You pay millions to do this. Can we just provide something that, we can actually look and go, oh, that's actually quite interesting. I didn't think about it like that. Which, remember the last time we watched a pundit and went, oh, actually that's pretty interesting. That's really interesting. That's the frustration, is the fact that we watch so many of these ex-pros and they just offer us very, very little. And that's why actually I find it quite interesting watching the Fantasy Premier League show of these guys who do hours and hours and hours and hours of research. They got the numbers, for example, and they pick up on certain players, certain patterns, certain form. And in many ways, I can find a lot more information from a Fantasy Premier League show than I do watching a preview show with a few ex-pundits who don't bother to watch the games, don't bother to stay up to date with what's happening. They flick through a few highlights and they read an article or two, and that's their research. No one's diving deep into what's going on, what's happening, how these teams are playing, where it's going wrong, what the plans are, where it's going right, what they're getting wrong, which players are instrumental within that sort of framework, because no one's willing to do that research. So it continues to frustrate me and to be honest, that's quite an all sport thing, to be honest. You look at certain, channels and TV stations, broadcasters, and the sort of the drivel that comes out of a lot of it former players is really, really poor. And hopefully, as we sort of go on, that things might get a little better and into the new media and getting more people who are involved at a much closer level involved to provide some more support. Right. Manchester United travelled to Turkey this week rather. So again, Manchester United travelled to Turkey this week to face Jose Mourinho, who apparently is under fire from the media, who have described him as unhappy and hopeless in the week after drawing 2-2 over the weekend. And we've read the story, haven't we? Mourinho, somebody who has got success wherever he goes. He wins trophies, it's what he does. And he is not very, very popular at the moment. And that actually makes me a bit more nervous about Thursday than I might have been before that, because a Jose Mourinho who's under pressure and a Jose Mourinho's got them to prove becomes a very, very dangerous Jose Mourinho, because how often does he come out with a performance, and it won't be pretty. We know it's Jose Mourinho, it's not going to be a pretty performance, but how often do we see him come out and silence the media, silence his critiques when it matters the most. So this criticism actually makes me very, very nervous for this weekend. How do you feel about it? Because I think that there is a lot to worry about to a certain degree. One of the quotes about him, this is one of the from a former goalkeeper, saying, right now Fenerbahce is mixed with unhappiness and hopelessness. We were all expecting something. We were expecting it from Mourinho. We were expecting it from the transfers made this year. We came this far, hoping that 2.5 months would pass and things would improve. But it is clear that this will continue. An ex-Fenerbahce midfielder, Sergeant Yeltsin, said, let's be a little proud of Galatasaray's success. I'm not criticizing the guys for making Galatasaray champions for 2 years. The kid is successful. If you criticize Mourinho today, everyone is right. He said you can't spend that much money and make them play like that. Talking about Mourinho and said that he doesn't have the ability to study opposition players like world-class managers. He says, he said as follows here. As for Fenerbahce, I think the summary of the day was hidden in the pre-match interview. The reporter asked Mourinho if Samson took any precautions against ground crosses and wing attacks. Mourinho did not understand the question at first, and he simply said to prevent the crosses. They could not prevent them. Samson's first goal came like this, and the second was a headed pass to Sona. The goals were proof that Mourinho was lacking in opponent analysis. However, the football is a game played with the opponent. Pretty bold to talk about Mourinho as someone who doesn't study and do his due diligence and doesn't look at the opposition. You know, I mean, this is a man who has won it at so many different clubs and so many different levels. And yeah, I mean, to those sort of criticisms are pretty wild. And again, this is what makes me nervous because I think a Mourinho who's been put under pressure is often a Mourinho that finds a result. And United are so desperate for a result because things are not going well. I mean, if you go look at the table in the Europa League, currently sitting down in 21st. So, you know, we at this stage we will go into the playoffs, but we need to be in the top 8. We need to be in the next go into the next round. That is what we want. Obviously, the new format, for example, and you've got the top 8 teams go straight through to the next round. The next sort of 8 teams go into playoffs, have to play an additional game. So United currently sitting with 2 games, 2 draws, with 3 points. Sorry, with 2 points rather. And win would take it up to 5 points, which in theory, depending on other results, could take them into the top 8. But you've got teams, for example, Lazio, Lyon, Spurs, Anderlecht, as well as I think it's FCSB, the Romanian club. They're all currently sitting 2 wins from 2, perfect 6 in that top 5. And we're already 3 points behind them after 2 games. So got to try and make sure that we respond and get a result. Because if we don't start climbing that Europa League table, we're talking about a team that suffers lots of injuries, having to play additional games. And that's the last thing we need. And that's also more from this is Manchester United. First of all, we shouldn't be in the Europa League, let alone be struggling to make the next round and have to be in playoffs. It's really not good enough. And this is a big chance to go away to Turkey, which is going to be a tough place to play. It's going to be against the Mourinho side, which is going to be tough to beat. They always are, especially something like the Europa League, which Mourinho would have sat down in front of the season and thought, yeah, this is a trophy that we can really go and try and win. He's won it before with United. He's won all the UEFA competitions, actually. He won the Conference League, won the Champions League. So he's won this competition. He's won all the UEFA competitions. He knows how to win it. And with all the pressure on him, expect them to be even more difficult to beat than they might have been without the criticism and the likes. Speaking of injuries, there is some very, very good news. And the good news is that Lenny Yoro has officially returned to individual training. The Manchester United centre-back has not made an official full debut since being ruled out during the preseason. However, he has returned to the grass and in individual training. This comes a few days after apparently he spoke to his friends and said that he really wants to be involved come the Arsenal game in December, which would mean that he'd need to be on the field probably sometime in November. So the first real big strides from this long-term injury for him as he gets back onto the grass. Hopefully he'll be back in training with the team in sort of 3-4 weeks' time and can get back to full fitness so that when we have that December period, which is going to be thick and fast with games, we've got somebody like him who's available, who's on the golden boy list. You know, he is the future of the defence of United. Paid good money for him. In theory, a really good signing. then got injured, and we've seen the story before. We need to get back to full fitness, and he needs to go on a bit of a run to sort of show why we invested in him. But very excited to see what he can do when he does get going, because during preseason he looked absolutely class. And he looked exactly like somebody that, he looked like a signing that United of old would make. He actually kind of reminds me a bit of Phil Jones when we first got him. The 19-year-old, really, really talented, looks like he's got everything, apparently loves defending, and now he's had that long-term injury. So let's really hope he doesn't follow the sort of Phil Jones career trajectory, where he doesn't get to play a lot of games and kind of filters into nothing in the end. Because I think Phil Jones genuinely had the ability to be world class. I mean, he won Premier League, Phil Jones. He won a lot of things. So he's not going to be sitting there, looking at the fact that he never won anything as a United player. But to have to retire, 31 years old, I think, when he eventually retired, is really, really upsetting. But he did manage to win a Premier League, won an FA Cup, won the Community Shield, won the Europa League. So he did manage to win a few things. Let's be fair, if Ranieri goes leaves United with a Premier League, an FA Cup, a Europa League, a couple of Community Shields, pretty chuffed. Pretty chuffed. And that's the funny thing. There's so many players at United, those old the players of old, Chris Smallings, Johnny Evans, those players, even the fringe players, and they might have never set the world alight or reached up to their potential, but they were playing at such a time when we were so good, and they still left with such impressive CVs. Johnny Evans has won everything. He's won the FA Cup. We actually won with United. I think he won with Leicester. I think he's won 2 or 3 Premier Leagues in there. He's won a Champions League. He was involved in that 2007-08 campaign. And those players who are not necessarily world class were just so solid in such a solid system that they leave with these CVs of trophies won and the likes. And that's what I miss about United, is the fact that if you don't come, you could be at United in a 2-3 year period and leave with no silverware. That is the reality at the moment. Thankfully, under Ten Hag, for example, we've had a League Cup and an FA Cup, so even players like Bruno Fernandes quite a few trophies to his name already. The likes of Maguire's won a couple of things at United. Would really like to have won the Europa last season. I think we probably should have, actually, in the end. But we do have trophies, and we need to make sure we keep picking up those trophies. Let's talk about the big story, shall we? So, reportedly, Bayer Leverkusen is currently lining up potential replacements for Xabi Alonso, who is potentially set to leave next season despite having a contract until 2026. The bad news, if you are a United fan, is that Manchester United is apparently not really an option at the moment, with Manchester City and Real Madrid leading the race for his appointment. If Pep Guardiola were to leave, apparently Manchester City are showing concrete interest and speaking to the Bayer Leverkusen manager. That'll be very much a long-term replacement. Real Madrid, obviously, always looking for sort of the long-term future, and who's going to replace Ancelotti, who's been so good and won absolutely everything. Now, this is the next big step for them. Now, it's interesting because he's still quite a young manager, is Xabi Alonso, but obviously that whole success by Leverkusen means that he's hot property. What, for me, was interesting, the fact that he was made for Liverpool, but it's going to come too early for him, actually. So, probably won't go there. So it's going to be an interesting situation with regards to what happens this season, for example, with Bayer Leverkusen, and how well do they do with Champions League, for example? How do they cope? And, was it a flash in the pan? I mean, it's difficult to say it's a flash in the pan when you go and win the league. And you undefeated. I mean, it was almost undefeated across the entire blooming season, across all competitions. But, I mean, it was mental just how good they were last season. But they're currently sitting in 4th. They've already lost a game, drawn 2, and they're currently sitting 3 points off of Bayern Munich, who won 5 so far, drawn 2 at the moment. They are still undefeated, as are RB Leipzig. So not to say that Bayer Leverkusen are doing badly, but not off to the start. I mean, they've already lost a game this season, for example, where last season they didn't. And so it was inevitable. I don't think they'll ever go. I'll be very surprised if they go back-to-back titles, because I mean, it was such an incredible feat to begin with. To be able to repeat it would be absolutely mental. But this is where we really get to see the managerial careers. We saw it with Claudio Ranieri. He won the Premier League and went on to do very little after that. So is this a flash in the pan, or is he the real deal? I personally think he's the real deal. I think, you look at the way in which they won it, the football they played, the players that, took a step up. I think the recruitment was very good. So I do think it is a bit of a Leicester story, but just so much more in terms of quality of football. But this would be a difficult season for him. And if things don't go well, he finishes 5th, 6th, 7th, It'll be interesting to see if there is a bit of hesitancy from the top clubs like your Manchester Cities and the likes, whether they just look at him and say, no, we reckon he's the real deal. We're not worried about those results. This is our guy. This is who we're backing. And they kind of go fully in on him anyway. And so time will tell. Time will tell. As United board, though, you've got to be looking at him, surely. You've got to be looking at it, and you've got to be proactive. I mean, Manchester City, won the Premier League, sacked the manager, brought in Pep. Because he was available. Because you had to go and get the best manager available. Now, Xabi Alonso is not that. He's not Pep Guardiola at Barcelona, Bayern Munich. Won absolutely everything in Barcelona, won everything at Bayern Munich, was the best manager in the world at the time. And you go and sit there and say, we have to get this guy. This is the guy to get. But United missed out on Pep, or potentially getting Pep. We missed out on potentially getting Klopp, for example. We've missed out on key managers throughout the history. And how often has it happened because of timing? And you're like, oh, well, the manager's not doing terribly, so we don't really need to sack him. And it'll be very interesting to see if we get to a situation where he becomes available or potentially available. Ten Hag is still not sort of convinced, and they go, right, you know what, even though Ten Hag's not doing terribly, we're going to make a big decision. We're going to bring in a manager we believe will restore us to the top. At the moment, they believe it's Ten Hag, but there are better managers out there. Let's be perfectly honest. Ancelotti, at this stage, Hans Flick's having a fantastic time in the Liga. You look at the way Arne Slot started, for example. There are better managers probably than Ten Hag in the world. And if one of them become available, if you're looking at the best manager in the world potentially become available, as United, you've got to be looking there and say, we've got to at least think about it, at least consider the fact that maybe we should be bringing him in. Because if you're not, what are you doing? If you're not looking at some of the best managers in the world and thinking we've got to bring them in, despite what it takes, whether it means sacking a manager, even if they're doing well, you've got to sometimes take that risk. Manchester City took that risk and sacked a Premier League winning manager. Do you think they regret it? No. I mean, they've won the treble. They've won 4 or 5 Premier Leagues I think under Pep. It's City. And that was because the best manager was available at the time. They obviously had the money for transfers, and from a footballing structure point of view, they were so ready for that dominance, and they had every single bit of the tools and the assets they needed to make it happen. Now, in theory, United need to become that. We need to be a club where, yes, we don't want to be necessarily, everybody sort of talks about the oil-based club and that kind of works, and we're not going to quite necessarily be that. And United's quite lucky in the fact we've got the historical value as a club to be bringing in a lot more revenue easier than the likes of a Newcastle or City. But we've got to make sure that we go back to the times with Ferguson. Ferguson got what he wanted. We could talk about how amazing a manager he was. We also did. We broke transfer records. We brought in lots of players. Ferguson got what he wanted. We used to go and buy basically the best striker in the world quite often. Van Persie at the time. You look at Rio Ferdinand, that signing. We brought in so many players over the years who were top players, but big signings. The Wayne Rooney signing was a big signing. We've brought in big players often as Ferguson, and we need to get back to that situation where we've got this phenomenal squad, but we're continuously looking at adding it, not continuously trying to rebuild to try and find players who are good enough to be within the squad, which is kind of what we feel the situation at the moment. And that just shows you the stark comparison to where we are now to where we were 14, 15 years ago. And it's sad when you say 14, 15 years ago. It always used to be like, 5, 6 years ago we were great. It's not 5, 6 years ago. It's almost 3 times that. The Ferguson era, 2012, 13 was the last Premier League. And that's more than a decade ago. So to have gone a decade without winning a Premier League is very, very depressing. And that's what I'm saying. If you truly believe Xabi Alonso is the one to go and get, and I tell you what, I'm fairly convinced that he would. I think he's better than Ten Hag would be long term. I do think he's got a lot to learn. I don't think he'd necessarily be an overnight success at United, but I think if you gave him 2-3 years, you gave him the right tools, I think he turns United into a Premier League winning club. And that sentence in itself, for me, would warrant the discussion. You've got to look at it now. You've got to look at United right now and say, right, things are not good. I mean, if you look at a month in Christmas and things aren't going well, you go, right, you sack Ten Hag, you say to Ruud, take us through to the end of the season, for example. A lot of people were rumours that's why Ruud was brought in, that he is a potential interim manager solution. And you then say, right, well, take us to the end of the season, and you go start throwing money at Xabi Alonso, and you start saying, this is the project, this is what we want you to head up, and you bring him in. If you believe that he's going to be good enough and he can do that, which I'm very close to believing so, you've got to go all out, because we haven't. We've missed far too many good managers in the past. We missed our chance to get Pochettino. Would he have done, better than what we had? Who knows? Would he have won a trophy? At the moment, Pochettino's kind of really had a bad time since leaving United, but I do think he's gone to the wrong types of clubs. And I think Chelsea were wrong to sack him. I think he was actually onto something there. But I do think that at the time when Pochettino was linked to United, if he had come to United, I think it would have been the right decision. I think things would have turned out a lot differently. But we've consistently missed out on great managers throughout the years. We cannot let that happen again. We've got to identify who the future manager is, who the future of managers is. And that's not, as I said, we're Manchester United. It's not about who's like a nice up-and-coming manager that could be a good job. No, who is the best? Who is the best manager? And how do we go and get the best manager so we can be the best club again? And the fact that that's not even like the conversation that happened shows you so much of what's wrong at the moment. And the big question is, some people say, oh, well, would the best managers come? Of course they'd come. United is still the biggest job in the world. More so now than ever. Real Madrid, probably still the biggest club. But I don't think it's a bigger job right now than United, especially because of the situation it finds them. You take United back to the top. It's one of the most well-supported clubs in the world, arguably the biggest club in the world. I will always say it's the biggest club in the world. But we've not made decisions like the biggest club in the world for so long that it'll be so refreshing to see Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe identify a manager and say, right, well, this is our manager. This is the one we want. Doesn't matter the fact that we've got a manager at the moment. He's not doing well enough to warrant us backing him. We're going to make a big decision. We should never have given Erik ten Hag that contract. That's why I locked him down. They should never even talked about the fact that they were going to, reconsider and then potentially back him. They should have just said, he's got a contract. We're happy with him. Cool. Off we go. And basically just said, you're not going to sack him. Instead, we gave him a contract, said, no, we really, really back him. Now things aren't going well. And now we're in a bit of a pickle. So we really want him to work out. But if things aren't working out, you've got to then make a big call and be willing to say, right, made a wrong decision. We're going to go all in after Xabi Alonso in a year's time, sit there with a proper new project. Because we're in the third season of Ten Hag and we're still talking about a rebuild. How can that be? And how many of his players that he signed, for example, have really come off? Mason Mount, been a disaster signing. Tyrell Malacia, disaster as a signing. Anthony, disaster signing. Casemiro had a good first season, disaster second season. We've had far too many players who we've signed under Ten Hag that have just not been good enough and not performed. At least Andre Onana, for example, starting to really sort of at least come good. But, we're sitting here talking about the project 3 years into a managerial, tenure, and we've got excuses like injuries. Oh, no, but the injuries, therefore I haven't been able to pick my team. No, you've had 3 years to build a squad. Not just a team, to build a squad. And if you can't have a squad and be ready to play at all times because of a couple of injuries, then you're not good enough. You look at some of the teams that Sir Alex Ferguson had to put out. When we were playing Raphael in the midfield next to like Fletcher, and you're playing, people like Dan Fletcher, Carrick centre-back and the likes. You look at some of the teams that Sir Alex Ferguson put out over the years and managed to win, managed to get results. And now you look at the money that's been invested into this United squad and the quality of players we've got and the level they were playing before they come to United, and there's no excuse. We always used to look at Mourinho and Van Gaal and say, how do we manage to bring all these players and just turn them into disasters? When was the last time a player arrived at United as somebody relatively unknown and now have elevated themselves as a phenomenal player? We're seeing it now more recently. Garnacho's coming through, and he's been a product of the United Academy, and look at the heights he's sort of reaching. But he's one of the few players who's really improving within United. Bruno's come, obviously, but I think Bruno came pretty ready-made. We need to see far more players improving at United, and players, when they do leave United, they're better when they're right. When was the last time you could talk about a player being better at United when they're right? When was the last time we sold a player because we bought them, they were really, really good, and we sold them for big money? We don't do it anymore. We now sort of sell for lower prices to just try and recoup some of the transfer fees. It's an absolute amateur hour, really, when it comes to our transfers. So yeah, at the end of the day, if he's available, I think you've got to potentially look at the Xabi Alonso option, because if you believe he's the best option, go for it. You have to go for it. You have to pull the trigger. The fans demand it. We demand it as fans. We demand it as a club to be getting the best in the world and to making big decisions. And if you're not, then you're not the right owners for us. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do smash a like on the video. Do subscribe to the channel as well. And we'll see you guys tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. as well as tomorrow evening. And I'll have a couple of short videos across the channels. We did today, ranking number 7, which didn't go particularly well, I'll admit. So we're going to do a lot of those sort of videos. I'm going to be doing a 5 best strikers of United, or my best 5 strikers United. That's going to come up tomorrow. So a lot of that kind of content coming as well. We will then also have the Eric Ten Hag press conference. That'll happen on Wednesday. We'll have a reaction for that.